The Dead Sea was absolutely miserable. It was early 2023, March break. We were on the Holy Blossom confirmation trip. And it was gray, it was chilly, it was all around unpleasant. There were no buckets of mud. The chill in the air punished you for showering on the beach. And even the scientific miracle of super buoyancy, that kind of special floating you can only get at the Dead Sea, it only entertained our kids for a few short minutes. It rarely rains at the lowest point on the face of the earth, but somehow that day, it did. Enough rain, in fact, to divert our plans, to flood out the road, and to cancel our trip to Masada. So what else could we do? We headed back towards Jerusalem. And as we took the turn back onto Route 1, we stopped at the gas station that's right there. We stepped off our bus to get some snacks, and I heard a gasp from behind me. Camels! Yes, sitting at the gas station on a once plush, now dilapidated rug was a camel. Its Bedouin keepers perked up like magic the minute we expressed any interest, and the students barely even needed to ask, because I am naturally soft-hearted, and they had been so good. So I just nodded to the guide and said, please try to save us from getting ripped off too badly. And off he went, and he and the Bedouins settled on a price, and just like that, 2 more camels appeared from nowhere. The day was saved, and for the next 10 glorious minutes, our confirmands laughed and screamed and took selfies from Camelback as they rode around the parking lot of the Beit Arava Kibbutz Welcome Center. And days later, as we boarded the flight returning home to Toronto, I asked them, so, what was your favorite part of the trip? And the camel ride that we never planned for was a strong favorite. In our Torah portion this week, the servant of Avraham, often called Eliezer of Damascus, is sent by his master home to fetch a potential bride for Yitzchak. Avraham will not allow his son to marry a Canaanite. He prefers a bride from Mesopotamia, from Haran or Nahor, his original people. Having sworn an oath to seek a willing bride for Yitzchak, the servant departs. And the text is very explicit here that he leaves with an entourage, bedecked in riches, all that is good from his master as a potential dowry for this will-be bride. And how does he carry it? V'yikach ha'eved esera gemalim megamelei adonav. That the servant took 10 camels from amongst the camels of his master. And then a little bit further in the text, we're told that the camels kneel on command. And then these 10 camels are watered by Rivka, fed and lodged at her home, and she showers hospitality on both the stranger, the servant, and the animals. And when she agrees to marry Yitzchak, she too gets to ride on a camel, back with all of her maids, and they bring these camels back from wherever they are. People argue somewhere between Syria and Turkey, all the way back to Israel on camelback. And that when she comes and she sees Isaac, Yitzchak, for the very first time, she's so smitten by the sight of him, they fall in love at first sight. She literally falls. Or maybe more delicately, she leaps. She elegantly alights from her camel. If you read this week's Parsha, you cannot miss the camels. Our rabbis certainly did not. In the Talmud, the rabbis teach us that camels, when seen in a dream, is a symbol of death. Death decreed upon you, but do not worry, they say, because the sign of the camel is a sign that your death has been prevented by heaven. It's a symbol of the camel moving you through death, right? Like moving you away through the danger, through the desert. It's fascinating. The root form for camel in Hebrew, gimel, mem, lamed, is also another word for giving or gifting. Birkat Gomel from our liturgy is the premier example of this gamal. the Birkat Gomel too is a prayer for surviving danger. We thank God in it for giving us every goodness. And this ties the interpretation of dreams from our Talmudic ancestors, that camels are a symbol of death overcome, avoided and averted, and transforms that prayer and that symbolism into something that we actually still recite even today. Tomorrow morning, one family in our congregation will recite Birkat Gomel at the baby naming for their brand new daughter. Rabbi David Kasher of the Hadar Institute points out another use of this Gimel Mem Lam Lamed root is to wean, higamel, as in to take a child and to wean them off of their mother, to create independence. And this too is appropriate in this Torah portion, because in Kaye Sarah we learn, of course, that Sarah has died. And Isaac, Yitzchak, is not doing well with it. He is deeply mourning, and possibly, according to our rabbis, he is still even living in his mother's tent as a way of keeping close to her. It's not until Rivka arrives that Yitzchak finds comfort and is able to move forward in his grief. Rivka, argues Rabbi Kasher, weans Isaac from the loss of his mother. And she also, quote, weans the coming generation from the previous one. Rivka's arrival on camelback is what allows our story to move forward and come into the story of the next generation. Yes, Rabbi, that is very fascinating. Please remind us, why are you talking about camels? My second point then. That for around 10 years now, biblical historians and archaeologists have argued that in the time of the patriarchs, camels are an anachronism. An anachronism, which is to say an object that doesn't fit the historical setting. Camels, they say, were not domesticated until approximately the 10th century before the Common Era. And Abraham, the Torah tells us, was alive in the 18th and 17th centuries BCE, which makes the difference between camel domestication and the story of the patriarchs somewhere between 700 to 800 years. Now why? Why are scientists arguing this? Well, Dr. Erez Ben Yosef and Lidar Sapir-Chen, who are Israeli scientists at the university, at the Tel Aviv University, have spent a large part of their career digging for camel bones throughout the Arava and Wadi Finan in Jordan. And often they find them at bronze and copper smelting camps where the animals were used as beasts of burden and sometimes food. And they have used radiocarbon dating, and they've looked at them again and again, and the oldest camel bone they can find is that 10th century camel, which puts the story of camels being domesticated and widespread throughout the land of Israel as equivalent with the time of David HaMelech, of King David, not the patriarchs. And generally speaking, by the way, this is how archaeological proof works. If you can't find remains of an object from before X period or after Z date, the scientific argument is that the object probably just doesn't exist, not that you haven't found it yet. So for instance, if I can't find a certain language written down or spoken after such and such a date, I can assume that it went extinct at that date. Does that make sense? And similarly, if I can't find bones of a certain animal in an area before such and such a time, my assumption is that they were only introduced to the neighborhood in that era. And so this argument that camels were brought into the land of Israel is that they were domesticated in the Arabian Peninsula, and they came in as beasts of burden that were very expensive, and they served as a sign of wealth and prosperity, popular amongst merchants and long-distance travelers. And before camels, people used donkeys and mules. And archaeologists and scientists have been able to date donkey and mule bones back to the negative 18th century. The upgrade to a camel is much like an upgrade in our own time, from animals to tractors. a new tool that fundamentally alters everything to the point where people can no longer remember or imagine the world without it. So then, how do camels get into the Torah? Well, the scientist argues that there were no camels, but, and this is the point that Dr. Noam Mizrahi makes, who's an Israeli Bible scholar, that when literary construction of the Torah is happening, the authors of the Torah, the compilers of the Torah, are writing hundreds of years after the stories are set. And they cannot imagine a world without camels. So when they tell the story of the patriarchs, it makes sense to them to describe in great detail the wealth and the livestock, the world they see outside their own window. And Mizrahi calls this camel anachronism the historical equivalent of if today we talked about how people in the Middle Ages used semi-trailers to transport goods from one European kingdom to another. Because how else would they get there? It's not malicious, but it is born from an inability to reconstruct the world that was. And I had, actually, a really interesting personal experience of this not so long ago myself. I was telling my little girl, my daughter, how lucky she is to grow up in the same city as some of her grandparents. Because when I was growing up, I only got to see my grandparents 2 or 3 times a year when they came to see me or I went to see them. And she said, right, but you could still call them. And I said, yes, and I called them all the time. She said, right, and so you saw them on the phone. And I stopped because, of course, to my 5-year-old, calling your grandparents is a visual medium. It's not something you do on a telephone. Naturally, this idea of an anachronistic camel does not sit well with the religious community. And in response to these scientific papers, several rabbis have written thoughtful rebukes. Rabbi James Berman, for instance, wrote a rebuttal in the Times of Israel saying that this is actually just an attempt to sensationalize something and make a mountain out of a molehill, that the Torah never says Abraham raises camels. You actually know exactly where Abraham gets these very camels from. He gets them from Egypt. When you read the previous Torah portion and Abraham leaves Egypt, there are camels amongst the list of gifted animals that Pharaoh gives him that makes him wealthy. And did they have camels, domesticated camels in Egypt in the 18th century before the Common Era? Yes, they did. And where else were there camels domesticated during the times of the patriarchs? Why, in Mesopotamia, in Turkey and Syria, which is exactly where Eliezer is going to go pick up a bride for Isaac. So argues Rabbi Berman, yes, that you are meant to notice the camels in this week's Parsha because it is a sign of wealth and success and prosperity, all the things which God promised Avraham. And the Parsha even says, Avraham was old, advanced in years. The Lord blessed him in all things. So when Avraham sends a retinue of 10 camels, it's like someone going to the old country with showing off all their money, all their success, all of their ooh la la, as it were, as if they can say, look, I moved away, I did great, so please give me the right kind of girl to marry my son. And then, of course, other camels do show up in Genesis 2. And they also support the rabbi's argument. Rabbi Berman points out that the camels that are explicitly there to bring Joseph down to Egypt, those don't belong to people who are native to the land of Israel. They're in possession of Midianite traders who spend their entire lives going from Syria and Mesopotamia down to Egypt and back again. And when the brothers make their trip down to Egypt, do they ride camels? No. The Torah is explicit. They ride donkeys. The wealthy foreigners have access to things that the Israelites, 2 generations after Abraham, do not. And so what he teaches is that the Torah isn't hiding anachronistic camels in plain sight, that the use of camels is an explicit choice to show rare, expensive animals that highlight a story of prosperity and struggle and cultural differences between Abraham's family and everyone else. An anachronistic camel takes you out of the story. The camels in the Torah, says Rabbi Berman, are there to teach you something even more important. There are a lot of ways to square the circle between historical accuracy, biblical accuracy, scientific accuracy, archaeological, rabbinical, etc., etc. And the Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Alev HaShalom, wrote an entire book on this called The Great Partnership, which I strongly recommend to you if you are interested in the subject of how science and history and the Bible, the Torah, link together and work together, as opposed to butt heads. Ein kasha. There is no conflict, the Talmud might tell us. Not if you look deep enough, close enough, to find the beautiful resonances and symmetries between the two. Which brings me, of course, back to the camel. You only notice the camel. You only notice it with a careful reading of the Torah that goes beyond the story. You have to pay attention to the window dressing. You have to see the beast of burden that is carrying our protagonist towards the future. And it's only when you dive deeper than you've ever delved before that these questions of science and technology and theology, they entwine. And they cause us to ask the greatest question of all. How many humps did Rivka's camel have? And it is on this that the great American humorist Ogden Nash once wrote, "The camel has a single hump, the dromedary too, or else the other way around. I'm never sure. Are you?" Shabbat Shalom.